Welcome, friends, and anybody else on the internet who happens to be watching. Today we'll be doing a presentation on channeling your anger in sports and esports specifically. This presentation is going to be somewhat long-winded. I think there are simple ways to go about this topic, but I'm going to be doing a deep dive today, just letting myself geek out about all of the psychology and the practical tips that I can give you. My code name's Mischief, my real name's Luke, and I'm actually studying in a master's program right now to become a clinical mental health counselor. I play competitive laser tag, and that is what this primarily will be for, but it can be applied to anybody who plays online games or athletic real-life sports, anything in between, anything competitive. This is a pretty common phenomena, people struggling with anger, and today we're going to talk about how to overcome that. Let's start with a little example here.
When there isn't an enemy around.
Oh! F*** me! That's the f***! Oh, f*** these cunts! Move it better! Move it better! I'm just f***.
Now, isn't that charming? I am sure. Come on. Next. There we go. All right. I'm sure everybody here has seen those compilations of people raging when they're playing a game. This is a really common thing. Just go into any online voice chat, or you can watch competitive sports, and you will see people just losing their marbles like that. So let's talk about what happened. Let's break this down. So this individual here, don't know him. I'm sure he's a fine gentleman, but had a rough moment there. He was playing a game. All right, that's obvious, but we got to start there. And like, this wasn't him going to the grocery store. It wasn't him driving, although that's another great place to get angry. In this situation, he was in the middle of a competitive game, in this case, League of Legends. And then something essentially didn't go his way. In response, he yelled, destroyed his computer equipment. At the very end, you can see he hurt his hand. And then we don't know what happens next, but presumably one of the next two things happened. He either quit the game because his keyboard was destroyed, and in that case, the other teammates that he was playing with essentially lost a player and were almost guaranteed to lose the game because he got angry and destroyed his equipment. Or he continued the game and proceeded in an escalated state like that, which, as we're going to talk about later, that can have a detrimental effect on the game. So the question here that we're going to talk about is why? Why on earth did he do this? I think for some of you the answer is going to be obvious, but I do want to break it down here. He was trying to win a game, and in response to something going poorly, he essentially destroyed his chances at winning the game. Was this appropriate is one of the questions I wanted to ask. Well, we're going to define appropriate as a suitable or proper in the circumstances. And was this helpful? Was it useful in attaining the desired outcome? I would say for both of these questions, the answer is no. We're going to explore that. Let's talk about tilt right after I take a sip. Delicious seltzer water. So tilt is a gaming term. If you've gamed, you've heard of tilt. It's a synonym for a rage, outburst, temper tantrum, really just an exaggerated expression of anger. I made it a definition here. I'm calling it a destructive expression of anger, contradicting the individual's pursuit of their goals and the spirit of the game as the result of a negative outcome. I've listed some ways that tilt can manifest itself. Quitting in the middle of a game is definitely one. Intentionally making bad or destructive in-game choices. Intentionally giving minimal effort. Expressing anger at the cost of playing effectively. Breaking or damaging equipment or the environment, or intentional cheating. I'm going to throw in intentional sabotage as well. So the root of tilt is anger. And down here I put, anger is not an inherently bad emotion, right? The point of this whole thing isn't to say, don't ever be angry, stop being angry. The hard thing about emotions is that we can't really control them. We can choose how we respond to our emotions, but your emotions are valid. When you're angry at something, it's because something essentially is perceived as an injustice. That's the purpose of anger. For example, like if somebody threatens your friend, right? You're going to become angry, and that's really what anger is made for. If you were to be passive while somebody is hurting your friend, there's something that is just that, like, it essentially displays a complete lack of empathy and humanness. Anger's purpose is to protest or fight against a perceived injustice. Now, the key word there is perceived, because some injustices are, we subjectively view what an injustice is. It could be a civil rights case. It could be something as horrendous as racism or sexism, and we see lots of anger against those things. Or it could be against, hey, I'm losing at a game. So, and hear me out. Like, a game isn't inherently something that I'm not going to sit here and say you should never get angry at a game, right? Because, like, people put in tons of effort into games and they can change people's lives. What we're going to talk about here today is that well-channeled anger is both helpful and appropriate. Those two questions from before. And that will be the goal today. We're talking about channeling your anger. We don't want to do what that guy in the last video just did. What he did was essentially completely go against his goals. He wants to win the game. Well, then don't yell and smash your keyboard, right? Although it might be easier said than done sometimes. But we're going to talk about that. Let's look at another example of anger.
You know why? Because it's f***ing halftime and we're f***ing 2-0 down to the f***ing Mexicans! What's wrong with you? Get your f***ing fingers out with your bottle f***ing gun and come and f***ing pay attention with a You know why? Because it's f***ing halftime!
Come on. All right, so that was a video by Mike Bassett, and he is a soccer coach. So we're going to break it down. So what was the situation? Was this anger appropriate for the situation? The situation was they're in a soccer game, they're losing at halftime, and he made particular note to say that they're losing to the effing Mexicans. So the way he said it made it sound like we really shouldn't be losing to them. Is it appropriate? Well, I'm sure they're getting paid a lot of money to do this. I'm sure they want to win. So, in a sense, it's reasonable to say he might feel angry about this. Might not be reasonable specifically for, like, the opponent, but to want to win a game, sure. Now, let's talk about, was this helpful? I'm going to say absolutely not. He was throwing things at players. He was shaming and insulting the players. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Throwing a tantrum like a slightly racist 5-year-old. That's how I'm going to define it. Is this the most effective way to get what Mike wants? Good. I just had to do my best Dora the Explorer impression. I'm going to go ahead and say no. And I won't explain why. I think we can find some better examples out there of anger that gets you what you want. In this case, it seems like Mike's anger is only serving to show that he's upset with his players, but he's not doing anything to get them out of the situation of losing.
Hey, quit calling the plays, all right?
Hey, we gotta run the ball.
Wait,
down
when
there.
we pass, watch,
Can we not run the
we'll run the ball.
Can we run it down there?
This play,
We
center.
run it down
Yeah,
there.
Jeff,
Okay, so
we
run it.
will. All right, when we call pass plays, block.
That was totally
All right. So there's another example. That was Peyton Manning, quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts from a while ago. So the situation, was this appropriate? Jeff, who is one of the linemen, was choosing his own plan over the team's plan. When Peyton wanted to throw the ball, he was saying we need to run the ball. And he was essentially not only going against the team's plan and doing his own thing, but he was undermining Peyton's authority by basically telling other players we need to be running the ball. So, Peyton's actions, were they helpful? Well, he confronted Jeff in front of the entire team. He told Jeff to quit calling his own plays and play his own role. demanded that he goes with the team plan rather than making his own. And as Jeff was saying, we need to run the ball. Peyton did say in response, we're going to run the ball. So he responded to Jeff's issue. Now, was this the most effective way to get what he wanted? You know, it's up for debate. I think, you know, there might be some situations in which yelling at another player might cause them to feel demotivated or disrespected. It depends on the person. But there's also an urgency and kind of a blatant act that was hurting the team on Jeff's part. So I would say Peyton did use his anger in a way that was helpful. Although I think there could have been potentially better ways for him to go about it, like to get Jeff in private, to talk to him more like on an equal level and explain why it's so hurtful to the team. But anyways, let's go do another one. This is the last example I have.
So on the regains at times, quickly recognise when we can attack and when we go play, out, Jay-Z, back to Nat, reset, play and work your moments, boys. Because why it becomes a basketball match is one, at times we're not brave. So ball comes into us here and we're looking, stay on the ball a little bit. It's a man-for-man game up front. He's got the beating of him every time, lads. The first action of the game, he don't want a bar of him, lads.
Okay. So this was another soccer coach, Scott Parker. And you can hear it in his voice. He's definitely like he's got passion in his voice. There is anger. He wants to get the team to change what they're doing. They're not recognizing that there's opportunities to attack faster. And he says the teammates weren't being brave, causing them to pass the ball away way too often. So what he did was he got him in a private setting. He gave them specific directions for what he wanted different. His comments were impersonal and direction focused. He wasn't calling out any players or using any kind of insults. It was specifically about what players needed to be doing. He used affirming language by calling them lads, and there was a sense of camaraderie in that. Is this the most effective way to get what Scott wants? On the whole, I would say this was a great way for Scott to get what he wanted. See, he could have been calling out players. He could have been using insults. He could have been losing his temper. But in a very constructive way, he was able to channel it into giving firm instructions and in a way that the players are going to receive them and respect him for it. So let's validate. Feeling anger or disappointment because of a game, a teammate, or yourself is not the same as tilting. Anger can be expressed constructively, just as it can be expressed destructively, as we saw. Anger can change unhelpful or inappropriate behaviors of others. We saw that with Peyton, and sometimes, look, if someone else on your team is essentially destroying your chances at winning the game, sometimes the emphasis that comes with anger, the way it grabs people's attention, can be used to get another player to change their behavior and help you win the game. That's completely valid. Anger can be used to protest unfair play or unfair reffing, especially if you're right and it's not just because you don't like what the ref is saying or what the other players are doing. If you call them out and you call them out with anger, that can bring a lot of force, because if you don't use anger, a lot of times people won't listen to you, especially if you're in the middle of a game. Anger has sort of a threat of further action behind it. That's not to say you should use anger as an excuse to like threaten people, say you're going to hurt them, do things like that. But just the power that comes behind anger can be really impactful. It can be used to inspire or motivate others, especially if you see that they're not playing to the level you know they can play to. Again, it brings energy out in people. It sort of raises the stakes when you use anger, especially if you're trying to use it in that context. Or it can be used to create connection. I mean, anger, when you're angry, like, you think about it, you're being vulnerable. You're expressing a feeling. You can tell the other people on your team what you're angry about. And a lot of times, they might be angry at the same things. Anger can unite a team, you know? So what I'll say is that context is everything when it comes to expressing your anger in an appropriate and helpful way. So what actions are you taking with your anger? If you are doing what Mike did and you are screaming at the top of your lungs, you're insulting people, your anger isn't productive at all. You're essentially going back into what a child does, a young child when they're angry. They see an injustice when, they're not allowed to have a cookie, for example, or they have to clean up their toys because they don't like doing that. And if you don't like doing something, well, that's not fair. So sometimes children get really angry, like belligerently angry. They cause a scene in the middle of the grocery store, or they'll try to pit their parents against each other, all kinds of horrible things. And that's, I would say, really, it might work when you're a child, but when you're an adult, a lot of times people essentially hold on to those behaviors because sometimes it works. I mean, when you get angry, sometimes people they leave you alone and let you have your way. So that's unfortunately why it sometimes works and why people sometimes do it. But if you channel your anger into something more productive, like, trying to change the situation by giving instruction, by inspiring somebody, by calling somebody out, these things are mature, they're irrefutable, because if they're true in nature, then you're not going to be called out for being immature, right? Like if someone's cheating and you get angry at them for cheating and they actually were cheating, then I think that was an effective use of anger that can help change the situation. What kind of relationship do you have with people that you interact with? Now, there's a big difference between getting super angry at one of your best friends or getting angry at a stranger. I see this a lot, especially in laser tag. Like, there are people that I'm playing with, and I will allow myself to get angry at them middle of a game, and I'll yell at them. I'll yell at them when there's a high stakes situation and the anger I perceive is going to really help them. Or sometimes I do lose a little bit of control of myself and I feel a little safer to get angry with certain people. Sometimes you develop a relationship where it's okay to express anger at certain amounts or full amounts with those people. But for people that you haven't established that relationship with, I would say it's oftentimes quite inappropriate and destructive to express anger towards those people. And many times their defenses are going to go up when you do so. It's not going to come across the same as when you do it with one of your good friends. What is your intention? Are you trying to accomplish a goal? The goal that you were trying to accomplish in the first place? Are you moving yourself towards accomplishing that with your anger? Or are you essentially sabotaging your chance of making it happen because you don't like how things have gone? And even if you lose and the game has no more chance of being won, like, think about what the consequences are going to be of that anger if you express it inappropriately for the next game. I mean, are you going to create a habit where every time you lose, you're going to lose your marbles? Is your intention just to punish everybody on the other team for defeating you in a game? Or punishing your teammates for not playing up to the standard that you wanted? I mean, you can give instruction. You can call them out on mistakes. That can be actually quite helpful to them. But if you're just going to berate them, think about what the consequences of that's going to be and how, frankly, it's not going to help. And yeah, when you are getting angry, I love to ask this: how is it working for you? People get angry at the same things over and over. And it's not like, as humans, it's not like we recognize all the time when we do something over and over if it's ineffective. Sometimes it's all we know. And so we just keep trying harder and harder doing the same things. And then, we get mad, things get worse. We get mad because things got worse, they get even worse. You know what I mean? How's it working for you? I just challenge you to ask yourself that next time you find yourself in a situation where you're tilting. Okay, let's keep going. So how do we manage anger effectively? That's what this is all about. So I think on the whole, I'm not sure many people intentionally tilt, right? Sometimes it is very difficult to keep your cool. We're going to talk about two general categories here of managing anger. One is using de-escalation techniques. This is very important because when you're in the moment and you're angry, I mean, you can't remember a ton of stuff. You have to have short-term solutions, things you can do in the moment to calm down your nervous system, get a grip on your, yourself. But a big part of this presentation is going to be about doing inner work. That's a long-term solution. And, you're welcome to stop the video when we get to that part if you choose, but I'm encouraging everybody watching this to, open your mind, have a little patience, and allow me to probe your mind a little bit. Because I put here, anger is always a secondary emotion to an underlying emotion. We're going to learn about that in just a second. But essentially, when a person is tilting, and they're prone to tilting, it pretty much always indicates that something deeper is going on. Let's go ahead into the video and we'll learn more about that.
If you have anger issues, or if you know someone who does, they're not really angry. And that's the point of what I'm saying all of this here. You've got to see that person as someone who's sad or someone who's just hurt. And yes, they're using anger as a way of trying to cope with that. And in so doing, it could be creating collateral damage in their life. In other words, pushing a lot of people away or creating other issues, arguments, fights, etc. But if you see that person as an angry person, then you're not really going to get to the bottom as to why they're angry in the first place. It's firstly seeing that the anger is used as a form of control to deal with their hurts. And that
anger is used as a form of control to deal with their hurts. I mean, think about it. We as humans, we don't do anything without a motive, without believing that it could get us something that we want. So, when I want to bring up this idea of emotional triggers. Quote by Crystal Rapel from Healthline. An emotional trigger is anything, including memories, experiences, or events, that sparks an intense emotional reaction, regardless of your current mood. When we are angry, when something happens that we don't like, and we bring up anger, like I said, it's a response to injustice. It's a method of trying to get what we want to happen. But a lot of times, in fact, never is our emotions logical, right? The brain and the heart, they can sometimes really contradict. You might know this isn't the right thing for me to do to get what I want, but I feel angry. And part of how we are going to merge the two and get to a healthier place is by understanding where the anger comes from and learning more about how we deal with it outside of games and in games. So I do want to say a couple more things about emotional triggers. It can be related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder it's a serious mental illness that comes as a response to having something traumatic happen in your life or being exposed to traumatic events from other people repeatedly. And essentially, you create a system in your body that is on constant guard for something to happen that reminds you of the traumatic event. Even when you're normally, or even when you're completely safe, a person with PTSD might feel on edge, like something's going to happen. A common example is somebody who has been in war. Even when they're back in a safe city and they're not in a war zone anymore, they could hear a loud noise and suddenly be taken back to a time when they were in a gunfight. And their body will respond as though they're in the gunfight and they'll begin to panic. I mean, there's all kinds of symptoms that come with that. Now, but a post-traumatic stress disorder, like there are severe diagnosable symptoms, but it can happen on a much smaller scale. And a lot of times playing games can essentially be triggers that create great amounts of anger or underlying emotions. This doesn't really count as much for esports. Now I believe a lot of brain activity is happening, but I will say that exercise can release repressed emotions if you're not someone who is actively expressing your emotions to save people on a regular basis. I want to read this quote by Kate Hayes. Many of us can relate to the endorphin high feeling associated with intense exercise. Certainly, there's plenty of research showing how exercise can improve mood, relieve depression, and reduce anxiety. But in stark contrast to what we most often equate with exercise, emotional release can also free feelings of frustration, confusion, fear, anger, pain, sadness, and loss that seems to come from deep inside the psyche. I've experienced that many times. You go into a game, you run your butt off, you're sweating, and then I come out of the game and I'm furious, even if I won, but it's because I was rejected about that job offer, or my relationship's in trouble, or something like that. Things outside of the game brings it out of me. And I feel angry because of what's happening in my overarching life. That brings me to the next point of that, the game might touch on a deep wound or insecurity. It could remind you of something, or it might bring up something from long ago, something you haven't dealt with. And if you haven't done much work on yourself, then unfortunately, like for pretty much everybody, there's a lot of stuff in the closet, the metaphorical closet, things that we sweep under the rug. And if we don't look at them straight on, they will affect us unconsciously until we do. And finally, just on more of a physical level, like whatever game we're playing, it can activate a fight, flight, freeze response. If you're sent into some kind of a fear state or a panic state, if you're fighting really hard to win in a game, I mean, it can essentially be a simulation for a life or death situation. Like if you're in a fire or you're in a building and there's a shooter, like a real danger presents itself. People typically respond in one of three ways. They will fight. They will go into a mode of trying to ward off whatever the danger is. Flights, they will run from it as quick as they can, almost in an animalistic terror. Or they'll freeze. They won't be able to get their body to do anything. It's almost like they're outside of themselves. They're so overwhelmed by the situation. And frankly, sometimes games can put us in that spot if we're emotionally invested enough to feel like it's that dangerous. I want to let this woman, the holistic psychologist, talk a little bit more about anger.
The reason why the feeling is so big is because typically for most of us, what we're reacting to in the moment per se is much more than what's happening in the moment. Typically it's about something we're carrying with us from past experiences, from past pain, from past unmet needs that the current experience in a way is being filtered through. So the reaction I'm having when we understand where it's coming from is much more understandable, right? If I am someone who's been, say, abandoned and what's happening in the current moment is touching that deeper wound, then I might be able to understand why I'm kicking and screaming and yelling or detaching and dissociating, having that size of an emotional reaction, because it's about, for me in this moment, all of the times I've been abandoned or all of those pains that I've carried along the way.
Yeah, that was well said. So we've established that when we're angry, it's not so much about us being angry, but it's about something deeper going on. We're going to talk about that. But let's start with just a baseline. When you're angry and you're playing a game and you're not doing deep work on yourself, here's what you can do. Here are some practical tips. I've highlighted one word: breathe. You're not going to remember all of this necessarily when you're in the middle of a fast-paced game. But breathe. If you're having trouble, I would write the word breathe on your hand or on your arm or somewhere. You're going to see it when you are going nuts and you're angry, because this is the number one thing you can do to calm yourself. Breathe deeply from the belly in particular. Breathing from the belly allows you the most oxygen to come through your body and be stored in, which will give you the largest effect. When you're angry, your psychological or physiological nervous system, which is your body's nervous system, is hyperactive. It's like it's quick. You're breathing in and out quick. You're getting short breaths. Your body is preparing to. It's kind of going into fight, flight, freeze response essentially. This will calm and reverse that process. The next step, if you can do this, is to focus internally. Notice your belly. Like, instead of thinking about words and thinking about the situation, pay attention to your body. So notice your belly as you're breathing. That's one example, but you could also feel your chest. You could feel your throat as you breathe. Relax your shoulder, relax your jaw. You become present in the moment when you do this. And for some people, they haven't really been aware of what it's like to be present in the moment. And it's amazing. Especially in our world full of technology and distractions. A lot of times we're distracting ourselves as much as possible. This is the opposite. This is learning to go inside and almost think of nothing. You know, you can breathe in and out, and this will help to calm you even further. And then this is a little complicated, but witness the ego as an observer. So your ego is kind of like the voice in your head. And you're going to challenge your perception of what's happening. Now that you've breathed, now that you've focused internally, and you're sort of like, you're not caught up in what just happened, that person wronged you, that person destroyed you. You're just here, and you're a person, and you're okay. Now's the time to challenge your perceptions that might not be helpful. So I got some examples here. The idea here is to take something that is destructive, that is causing you a lot of pain, even if it's objectively true. And most likely it's a bit biased, but even if it's objectively true, you can say something else that's equally true but is actually helpful for you. If your teammate screwed you over and you are so angry at them and you're thinking my teammate sucks, let's think, like, what good does that thought do you? How does that help you win? If you change your perspective to my teammate made an honest mistake, you could go from there and potentially decide, I'm going to respond to their mistake by offering a solution. I want them to actually take my advice and change it, so I'm going to speak to them respectfully, because if I'm angry, they're probably going to ignore me. That's one way. Another example, this is unfair. You could say this is a tough situation. It might be unfair. It might totally be unfair, but what good does it do you to think that way? How is it going to help you win the game? Right? Or even if you want to try to use the situation to balance the teams a little better or something, in the moment, finish out the game. This is a tough situation, and you could attempt to make the teams more fair next time and say, this was tough for these reasons. I want to try to make a change here. But coming in and just saying this is unfair, it's, you know, people really do not respond well to complaints a lot of times, or whining. I'm going to be so bold as to say, like, this is basic psychology. People who criticize, condemn, and complain tend to be unfavorable to other people. You can get the same results by being respectful but firm about what you believe should be changed. Another one, I should be better. This one is inwardly focused. You're angry at yourself. I should be better. First of all, by what metric? How is that true? You can challenge this. I should be better. I should be better than what? Who said you had to be better? What is true is you could say, I wasn't able to succeed this time. And if you're not happy about that, you can take steps to make yourself better. But the should, I should be better, that's not helpful, right? All you're going to do is shame yourself and beat yourself up, and that's going to make you worse. All this to say is that your thoughts affect your actions. Your perception is your reality. Even if some of these things in the first sentences were true, you have to think about it in the terms of like, what's actually going to help you attain your goal? Is this appropriate? Is it helpful? And a lot of those things are not really appropriate or helpful. They're not good for showing respect to other people or yourself a lot of times. Okay, after games. Let's look at a couple tips for after games. When you're outside of a game, recentering yourself is good. You know, continue to deep breathe and focus internally. Keep doing what you were going to do. Exercise, especially light exercise, is a great way to calm down your system. Maybe not going for a sprint, but taking a walk or sitting down in a place that's relaxing to you. Replenish yourself. And you know, that's different for everybody. You could listen to some music. You can self-soothe, maybe like holding your own hand or using a stress toy or something like that is a good way to replenish yourself. Just, know yourself. And practicing self-acceptance. This doesn't mean you have to accept your performance in the game, right? This doesn't mean like, I'm not going to say in this video at all, you have to be okay with, losing and being but you have to remember, like, all humans are feeling creatures. Even if you don't consider yourself a particularly emotional person, you're going to feel emotions. And you can't control that. Like I said earlier, emotions are always valid. If you were angered by something, you're angry. Don't what's the word? Don't disqualify that. Don't disregard that or invalidate that. If you embrace that you feel angry, at least you can deal with the anger. And then challenge the negative thoughts the way we did earlier. If you're continuing to say negative things about yourself and your teammates, things that are unhelpful, ask yourself, like, is that true? And go from there. Let's get another tip from Watch Wellcast on anger management.
Step 1, control your breathing. When something pisses you off, instead of screaming or laying on the horn, take deep breaths. Spend 2 to 3 minutes breathing deeply, in through your nose, and out through your mouth. Imagine inhaling calm blue air and exhaling that red toxic air.
I said a lot of that already, but just to, reiterate, number one thing, what was it? Breathe. Okay. All right, so that's the presentation. No, I'm just kidding. That's not it. That is just the surface. That is a short-term solution. The root of the anger, finding that is the only thing that will actually help you in the future not to tilt as much in the first place. There's an expression called hurt people hurt people. If you've suffered in your life, and we all have, we've all suffered tremendous loss, pain, betrayal. Typically, if it's not managed by the person, if we don't look inside and figure out what's happening, a lot of times it unconsciously manifests as hurting other people, almost like getting back at the world for what happened to us. Sometimes we go after people that remind us of what happened to us. And a lot of times, like I said, with the exercise or the competitiveness, the game can bring out really raw emotions in deep wounds. And sometimes these can be expressed through destructive behaviors. Bullying, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, passive aggressiveness. And I don't feel like I have to go in very much detail as far as explaining why these things are not good. Going after other people, a lot of times we don't realize how much we hurt them with our words and our actions. Sometimes we never find out, or we don't find out till way later, but people who are bullied, they can they can experience depression, anxiety. You can give them PTSD. In addition, these behaviors can destroy communities. Some of the videos on our channel here, even when we have people that are tilting and throwing fits of anger, I just want to be honest that, you know, we've had people who wanted to share our videos, especially with people who could potentially, you know, give us a bigger lift. People who want to, like, who own laser tag sites for us in the Laserforce community. But they have not been able to share our videos around because of the just inappropriate, immature behavior that can be expressed in the videos sometimes. And these behaviors have sent people packing from all kinds of sports and games. In my experience, I used to be big into League of Legends, and I no longer play because I found that the community was very toxic, and I wasn't enjoying myself anymore as a result of the community. And so delving into this, doing this inner work, this is the next step, and this is what we're going to look at for the rest of the video. It's important. Sorry. Okay. Let's watch this.
Why you reading, bitch?
Because I like to read, and this is a really good book.
You're a really good bitch. Bitch.
Why you gotta bother me, man?
Because I'm not doing very well at school. I'm reading at a 3rd grade level. I really don't want to get left back. So when I see somebody reading for fun, it makes me feel that much more stupid. And then I get mad.
So the humor is genius. Just that is essentially what is underneath anybody who's a bully. Anybody who gets angry to a point of hurting other people, there's a reason behind it. And so we're going to talk about doing your inner work. Inner work for that bully in the video might look like working on his reading or working on not beating himself up for being behind in reading and coming to accept himself better, you know, so he doesn't feel like he's stupid. So I will say right up front, inner work is a lifetime commitment, but a permanent solution. Like, you're never going to complete your inner work. You're never going to be a perfect human. No one ever will be. And that's okay. But we can always be better. We're going to look at 2 big questions here. Why am I angry? And why am I playing the game that I'm playing that's making me angry? Why am I angry? This question can have a lot of answers. I would actually encourage you to pause the video here and ask yourself this and think back on what the underlying emotion might be. Because as we said, anger is always a secondary emotion. And we're just going to list off some things that could be why you feel angry. I feel hurt. I feel sad. I feel scared. I feel vengeful. I feel competitive. Other players are making me angry. I have an unhealthy goal. For example, something that I can't possibly attain, but I'm holding myself to that standard, or something that's causing me so much misery trying to attain it. Our relationship with losing the game. For example, some people might think, if I lose the game, that makes me stupid. If I lose the game, I'm a failure. And so we attach these hard circumstances with losing. Issues with ourselves, believing that you're not enough. Issues with other players, having a hatred for someone, being jealous of someone, becoming triggered. Maybe the game reminds you of something that makes you angry, something from your past. Poor emotional regulation. Sometimes people are actually biologically predisposed to having poor emotional regulation. They come from a family where, maybe they learned, or it's sort of in their genes that they are very emotional people, and it's difficult when they become angry to really calm themselves. And some other deep-seated issues that can relate to, like, what's my purpose in life? Who am I? Do you like yourself? Are you resentful of people who have things you don't have? Are you jealous? Are you hateful? You know, these are real, deep issues, and they're valid. If you are experiencing any of these, I have deep sympathy for you, and I care about you. You know, like, you're not alone if you are dealing with any of these. Think about how, like, when we're around people always present their best selves usually. We don't see the deep things that go on deep in a person's mind and heart. Sometimes people don't tell anybody about what's going on. That's why it's important to do the inner work, to bring it to the surface, to talk about it, to think about it. Now, I want to sidetrack for a minute. Ninja, I believe he is like a celebrity competitive Fortnite. That's the game that the kids are playing. He is a competitive Fortnite player. But he had this quote that I like. The phrase, "It's just a game," is such a weak mindset. You're okay with what happened, losing, and perfection of a craft. When you stop getting angry after losing, you've lost twice. There's always something to learn, always room for improvement, and never settle. I want to bring this up sort of in defense of what I believe some people watching this are going to be sort of feeling uncomfortable with, because anger can be channeled well. And some people might be sitting here afraid that when you start to do this personal work, you're going to lose your edge. You're going to stop pushing to become better at the game. Well, I want to talk about that openly. So, in defense of competitiveness, it's true, like statistically, the top performers in any activity are usually highly competitive. In like the business world, they're the people that are spending 14 hours a day in the office doing overtime, working to make their businesses or their companies perform. They're the athletes that are training day and night, and all they think about is the game. Competitiveness can be the main driving force that pushes people to become better at their craft. It is more common that a person will feel competitive when they measure their self-worth by comparing themselves to others. The competition is about something important to them. Their competitor has a similar skill level. They know their competitor personally. They have an audience. They have a very good or very poor ranking. And there are limited resources. I want you to look at those and see if you relate to any of those, right? If you are getting angry at a game, you know, maybe you think you're one of the very best people at the game, and the idea of not being very good makes you angry. Maybe it makes you feel bad about yourself, and that makes you angry. So you're driven to continue to be one of the best. Or maybe you've been in competition with somebody, and the idea of letting them beat you drives you crazy, so you always work to make sure you can beat them. I think this can be helpful, and it can teach people a lot and make them more capable. But here are 3 things that I think unhealthy competitiveness can look like. An inappropriate win-at-all-costs mentality can lead to incredibly destructive and unsportsmanlike behaviors such as cheating and bullying. I think there are situations when you would want to win at all costs. For example, maybe someone is trying to murder me. I'll be honest, I will win at all costs at that point if I felt like I was in that situation, or if someone was trying to hurt a loved one of mine. For me personally, that's a win at all costs situation. Now, whether, you know, certain games are win at all costs, that's up to the individual to decide, right? I'm not going to say that like certain games aren't worth that. We're going to talk about that later, about you choosing what is an appropriate mentality to have when you're winning or trying to play a game. Excessive training can lead to burnout or isolation. And, you know, if you're a really competitive person, I just want to remind you, like, burnout can hurt your performance. Burnout is when you essentially you are pushing your body, your physical, your emotional limits so much and so long that you lose your capacity to continue. For example, it's kind of like when you are overusing the engine on a car without giving it proper maintenance. You know, maybe you start to burn through oil quicker and you don't have as much of a capacity to get up to speed as quickly. For me, burnout has looked, you know, in my counseling profession that I'm training for, like if I don't take the proper time to rest and recover, I start to lose the ability to empathize with clients. My emotional tank becomes smaller and smaller. Or for an athlete or a competitive esports player, you know, it could look like grinding so hard that you start to lose your fine motor skills and you start to make really simple mistakes that you really, you wouldn't normally make, but it's because like your mind is going off the tracks. Or isolation. And isolation is incredibly damaging for humans. We're social beings, and a lot of times, like we refill our tank by being around other people. Isolating can lead to a lot of really bad negative mental health symptoms, such as feeling depressed, feeling anxious, and paranoid. And finally, chronic feelings of inadequacy as a result of constant comparison to other people. That gets at a deeper root issue, and I think this is actually rather common for highly competitive people. Perhaps you were raised to think this way. Perhaps this is something you taught yourself, if this is you. But, you know, you could constantly compare yourself to people, need to be better than them to feel good about yourself, and that's literally the reason why you are highly competitive. And, well, that can be a way to meet your needs, but I think there are healthier ways to do it, and we will talk about that later when we get to the locus of control. But that, I will say right now, does indicate that someone has an external or an unhealthy locus of control for meeting their needs. Now, for anyone who follows basketball, Michael Jordan is a kind of a household name. He's considered one of the greatest of all time, one of like the one or two greatest of all time for basketball in the United States. If you watch the documentary on him, he might be the most competitive person to ever exist. He would make everything a competition that he had to win, even like sports that he wasn't predominantly active with, or even just like, you know, like little coin games that he would play with his friends. He had to win at everything. And this is something I want to let him say. This is part of his perspective on his competitiveness.
Winning has a price. And leadership has a price. So I pulled people along when they didn't want to be pulled. I challenge people when they don't want to be challenged. Once you join the team, you live at a certain standard that I played the game, and I wasn't going to take any less. Now, that means I had to go in there and get in your ass a little bit, and I did that. You ask all my teammates, the one thing about Michael Jordan was he never asked me to do something that he didn't fucking do.
So let's honor this mentality a little bit here, right? Fighting to be the best at something is not inherently bad. Michael Jordan said, "I'm only doing it because it is who I am. That's how I played the game. That was my mentality. If you don't want to play that way, don't play that way." Right? He never said that other people had to be like him, but he chose to be the most competitive person he could be, and that drove him to be essentially the absolute best in his era. At the same time, we need to take care of ourselves. And so I just want to give some tips from good therapy for managing unhealthy competitiveness. You know, developing self-esteem that is independent of your rank in a community is a good way to manage that. Right? Like if the only reason that you are being competitive is to gain a rank in a community, and that allows you to feel good about yourself. I just want you to think of a world, imagine a world where you had that rank regardless of how you performed in a game. Because that could change everything. It might blow your world wide open. You might have no reason to do anything. You might think like, well, why would I even play any games anymore if I had that? Well, think about it. I mean, you could be pursuing higher means. You know, you would have your self-esteem and you could be doing other things. We'll talk about that a little more later. I keep saying we'll talk more later, but we're going to get to some really deep stuff later about who am I, you know? Like, think about it this way. We all have a paradigm. A paradigm is kind of like a map for your life. They develop a paradigm early on in life, and it sort of is like their roadmap to life. But the problem with paradigms is that sometimes, well, all the time, everybody's paradigm is somewhat skewed. It's like, you know, trying to take a roadmap to get to Walmart, but your map keeps leading you as far away from Walmart as possible or to some completely different store. And then you keep going back to that same map thinking, this time it's going to take me to where I want to go. But it can continuously lead you in circles or lead you in really difficult patterns. And I would challenge the person that says, I need to feel good about myself by winning the game. I would challenge you, you could feel good about yourself and play the game for its own enjoyment, for its own sake. And you could potentially be way happier that way. Setting realistic goals that are ambitious without being unattainable. I've seen people torture themselves trying to attain goals that just they can't reasonably be expected to meet. Setting boundaries with rivals who exacerbate your competitiveness. If you're a kind of person who essentially must beat another person, there could be something unhealthy going on in the relationship between you and them. You know, maybe you're jealous of them over something. Maybe they wronged you and you want to beat them in a game to get them back. Well, that could be one way of handling that, but there might be easier ways that are more mature and humane and might actually accomplish what you want to accomplish. For example, just you could essentially say, I'm not going to talk to that person, or I'm going to limit my time with this person, or I'm going to decide that I'm good enough regardless of how that person performs. You can find a hobby that you can enjoy without feeling a need to be particularly good at it. This can be really a hard shift for really competitive people. For some people, the competitive aspect of a game is what makes it fun for them. However, it might be worth a try to go for something different. If you're finding that competitiveness is creating unhealthy circumstances in your life, and it might be good for you to find something that you don't have to be competitive at, you don't have to win at. Trying something new, like pushing your boundaries in this way, could change your life in a way you weren't expecting. And treating related depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues. For example, going to therapy, reading self-help books, getting exercise. These are all things that can help you with mental health issues. All right, I want to talk about ego for a second. This is a fun one that I've seen pop up in a lot of sports. Like I said, with laser tag. I find it common with people who are really starting to develop a strong skill set in most games. An ego begins to develop. And your ego is essentially your sense of self-esteem. Now, sometimes when you are becoming really good at something, the rush of feeling good at that can create a situation where you're leaning on your victory in that game, your identity within that game to feel good about yourself. So I would ask you, if you have a sense of self-esteem, stop and ask yourself, how do you maintain that sense of self-esteem? What is it that is sort of the life force behind it? Do you need affirmation from somebody? Do you just know it deep down and it's unwavering? Does it fluctuate constantly and you need to do something to get it? And then if it's related to the game at all, I would just ask, like, what does winning do for you when you do win in the games where you don't tilt and get angry and everything goes as planned? What does it mean if you win? I want to go to this next video. We have Craig Manning from TED, and he talks about ego just a little bit here.
The ego is what causes a lot of drama, shall I say, in our lives. The ego is always needing approval. Think about that for a minute. If you need approval from one person, how often do you need that approval per day? And if you need approval for 2, 3, maybe 5 people, how often do you need that approval? Well, what happens is it creates a hyperactive mindset or even a manic mindset that's always seeking this approval. Now, how does an ego mind get that approval? It gets it through outcomes, because outcomes is the quickest way that we can achieve that approval. The problem with outcomes come from the future, and that's where fear originates from. Think about that for a minute. Anything you're afraid of, it always originates from the future. I'm from Australia, where crocodiles are from. In one of the sessions with my mentor, he asked us, what are you afraid of? And I couldn't think of anything at the time, so I said crocodiles. He thought that was funny, and so we went through that. And he talked about, if a crocodile come through the door, what would we all do? Or he said, we'd all take off for the door. It's the thought of what the crocodile would do is what creates fear. Those people that are afraid of flying, what are they really afraid of? The flying part they're good with, it's the thought of crashing. They're not.
Right. So, fear. Let's talk about fear. Dun, dun, dun. Fear, it is just the nasty bugger that tends to be the root of so many of our emotions. So many things can be traced back to fear. And sports and competitiveness often has a root in fear. So I'm asking you, am I feeling fear? I would pause the video here and just really think about that. Am I feeling fear somewhere here? Some reasons you might feel fear. Excuse me. Fear of being rejected by my community, or being bad, for example, or not meeting a certain standard. You could have fear that if I lose, it means I am fill in the blank. Stupid, incapable, failure. You could have fear of being surpassed by other people. You could have fear of being judged by others. You could have fear of being controlled by others. Whatever it is, if winning at a game or being better than certain people somehow mitigates your fear, that's something to look at. In a way, it's corrupting the ability to enjoy a game, because the consequences of losing, of facing that fear that you're avoiding, they're always looming in the background, and your only escape is to always win or always do well. Let's say a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience talking about the nature of competitiveness. I want to give it a listen here.
Part of the reason that we're so obsessed with sports is because we like to see that dramatized, like the person we really admire as an athlete isn't only the person who wins. We don't like the narcissistic winners. They're winners, and that's a plus. But if they're narcissistic, they're not good team players, they're only out for themselves, then we think, well, you're a winner in the narrow sense, but your character is suspect. You're no role model, even though you're a winner. And it's because we're looking for something deeper. We're looking for the manifestation of character that allows you to win across the set of possible games. And that's a real thing. That's a real ethic. It's a fundamental ethic.
Thank you, Jordan.
Come on, baby.
Whoa. I went too far. The ethic, winning across multiple games. Right. Think about that for a second. Here's the big slide I've been waiting for. Second question, why am I playing the game? Why am I playing the game? These are a bunch of questions that I want you to ask yourself. What Jordan Peterson was just talking about there, winning across multiple sets, like, some people can win a game, but sometimes they do it by being a despicable person or cheating. But a person who can win the game, but also be a kind person, someone they can feel good about, like, that's 2 games, right? They win at the game and they win at respecting people. They might win at feeling good about themselves. When you're playing your game, whatever it is, online, in person, by yourself, is there anything more to it than just having it be for fun? Are you trying to be the best? And if you are, why? Are you fulfilling the desire of your ego? Are you avoiding some kind of a fear? Are you trying to win and attain what comes with winning? And when you do win, what kind of winner are you and how do you feel about it? Is there anything you're shoving down? I have a couple types of winners I want to show you here.
Come on, baby, bring it out. Bring out the piston cup. Ka-chika, ka-chika. Yeah! Now that's what I'm talking about. Hey, how come the only one celebrating is me, huh? Where are the girls? Bring on the confetti. Ow! Ow! Easy with the confetti. What's going on? Come on, snap some pictures. I gotta go sign my deal with Dynaco. Ka-chika, say it with me. Ka-chika, ka-chika. Everybody! Ow! What's happening? Hey, this is the chick era.
Oh, so that was, I think, Chick Hicks from Cars, and Chick Hicks was the world champion at that point. He won the Piston Cup. He threw one of the other cars off the road to do it, and as you could see, it sort of backfires on him. And what we can derive from this scene is that, Chick Hicks didn't want necessarily to win by itself. He wanted a deal with Dynaco. He wanted girls. He wanted fame. He wanted power. Right? He wanted to be admired by everybody. And that was his motive for winning, essentially, because if he really just cared about winning, he would be more than happy to take the cup and go. I would say that he was a winner in one sense, but he was quite the loser in a lot of other senses. Now, if you were just trying to get in here and learn about, how can I stop being so angry? I know this is a lot, but I really challenge you. Think about what your motive is, because it's going to change the way you respond to a game. And I want you to think, is there a game out there that you don't really care that much about, where you could win or lose and just kind of take it? How do you respond to that? Do you get tilted at that game? I would bet you don't. Because you don't have that emotional investment, whatever those underlying things are that go with it, or you haven't poured the blood, sweat, and tears into it to make yourself so invested. It becomes just a game, and you don't feel the need to do so many things to win it. I'm going to go to the next one. So this is a video with Patrick Mahomes. He's, at the time of this recording, he just won a Super Bowl, and he's currently considered the best player in the NFL. So this is fresh off of winning basically the World Cup. And this was what he had to say.
Kids love you so much.
Yeah, I go out there and have fun. I enjoy it. I think that's the biggest thing is you go out there and you play the game. It's a kid's game. We're so lucky to be on this platform, to be able to go out there and play and make all this money and do all this stuff and be here with you. And it all comes from a kid's game, so why not go and enjoy it every single day?
You're smiling all the time when you're playing. It reminds me of Magic Johnson, really, who had that kind of same effect that I think you have on football.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great person to be compared with, one of the all-time greats of any sport, and he did it the right way, and I want to try to do whatever I can to leave my mark on this game, more than winning games, but the way I played it.
Well,
I just think that speaks for itself. Like, this video isn't to say, like, you need to be Patrick Mahomes and don't be Chick Hicks, right? This is about you. And I want to ask you these big questions. Because when I look at Patrick Mahomes, the world champion, and he's calling his craft, as Ninja would call it, a kid's game, that blew me away. I bet so many people who have poured their lives into football were insulted beyond belief that he would call it a kid's game. But for him to believe it's a kid's game doesn't stop him from enjoying the game, and it doesn't stop him from treating his teammates well, and it doesn't stop him from being just the best at it. It shows that you don't have to sacrifice your character to become good at a game. Here are my big questions for you. Feel free to pause at any one that you think is good. I'd encourage you to pause at all of them. How is your anger affecting your life? Not in the game, your overall life. Think about how you think about yourself when you're falling asleep. How do you feel after you get angry? How is your anger affecting others? And how do you feel about that? What is the real cause behind your anger? What is that underlying emotion? How do you truly feel about yourself? Does your sport or game serve as a crutch for some personal work you need to do? And what are you going to do about it? I had to put this next piece in.
I know my own destiny, Uncle.
Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
Stop it, Uncle. I have to do this.
I'm begging you, Prince Zuko. It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
Oh, this scene gives me chills every freaking time. Okay, we are winding down here in this presentation. If you've made it this far, you're a trooper. Let's talk about locus of control. This is a concept that I just want to give you. It is essentially your perception of where control lies in your life. If you have an external locus of control, you basically believe that everything is happening to you and you have no control over it. You're sort of a victim of life. And an internal locus of control, you believe that you have the power to impact the world. The power is inside you. The control's inside you. Now, there's healthy and unhealthy levels to both, because on some level, you need to recognize you can't control a lot of things in the world. You also should learn about what you can control inside of you. And the concept I want to bring to the table here is, I would imagine everybody is after joy in some capacity here as a motive for what they're doing, why they're trying to be the best, why they're playing a game. Whether it is to feel good about yourself, to have that sense of inner peace, or just to do something that, you know, it stimulates your brain and you find enjoyable. I would imagine that is something everybody wants, is to be joyful. And I would say, I'd recommend, contemplate this, basing all factors that bring you joy on things that you have exclusive control over. Here are some things you cannot control. You cannot control whether you win or lose, right? Like, obviously you impact games and your choices shape whether you win or lose. However, before a game begins, you can't guarantee that you're going to win. Right? There's an element that's completely out of your control. No matter how well you play sometimes. Teammates, you can't control what they do. You can't control what opponents do. You can't control what onlookers, referees, people online, people watching you can do. And you cannot control having unwanted feelings and emotions. Those are going to come, whether you like them or not. The only thing that you can control is you and how you respond in any given situation. You could respond with acceptance. You can choose to have a perspective, like removing the ego and looking at it as an onlooker. Choosing the motives behind why you do different things. And I want to get personal here, because I think having an internal locus of control has really helped me in my journey to better myself as a player of sports and games. I was bullied as a child, and I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be popular. So over time, I began associating the popular kids, the cool kids, the people that everyone looks up to, they win a lot of games. They're athletic. They're good at things. And I began to associate winning with acceptance and popularity. I began to quit things if I wasn't good at them. I remember in 4th grade, we were playing, I believe it was Sharks and Minnows, and I was close to the end, but I got caught by the Sharks, and I started to cry, and I threw a tantrum. Because guess what? It wasn't just that I lost the game, but I was a loser. And I just had it proven to the whole class, because I had associated losing with that. So winning games became really important, excessively important for me, to a point where if it was a game, suddenly people were enemies or tools. If you were on my team, you were a tool, and you needed to behave and serve me well, because my self-esteem was in the hands of all those people. This mentality resulted in me treating people poorly, excluding people from games if I thought they were going to cause me to lose them, or simply being a bully. I felt worthless. That was the underlying feeling that led me to feel resentful of people who would beat me in games or who felt good about themselves without needing to win. And then came the anger. Now, I was able to work through this over time, and I am still working through it. I'm always going to be working through it through attending actual therapy, reading self-help books, building new friendships that assured me that I was valuable without needing to prove anything to these people, loving me for who I am. Growing up helped a lot. I think it's easy to have a lot of these things sort of translate from childhood when you are, in your late teens, early 20s. But as you get older, a lot of times you just learn better, and that's okay. Especially early 20s, a lot of times there's a lot of inner turmoil going on with people as their brains are fully developing. And I began to actually challenge the negative and illogical thoughts that I was having. New measurements of self-worth that I can control came into place. And nowadays, I find that it's much easier to keep calm in games. It allows me to be more creative, more whimsical, take bigger risks, be better at decision-making. Because even though I don't like losing, the looming fear that if I lose, I'm going to feel like crap about myself is no longer there. And I got some examples of those new measurements of self-worth that I want to share with you. Just indulge me here. Early on, I would say to myself, I will only be happy with myself if I win. Now I say I will be happy with my performance if I try my very best. I can always control trying my very best, but I cannot control winning. Before, I only want to play if I have a fair chance to win. Because if I didn't have a fair chance, I was probably going to lose, and you know what that meant. Now, playing as an underdog gives me the best opportunities to grow. Nobody said I'm entitled to fair matchups. Besides, how badass will I feel if I pull off this upset? It's not fun to lose and have bad matchups, but sometimes I have pulled off upsets and I look like a badass. I suddenly look like the best player at my site when I pull off these upsets, and I feel so much better about my abilities. Before, I'm better than X players. I'm a top X player. You know, I'm a top 3 player. I'm a top 2 player. Now I say, comparing myself to others sets me up to become prideful and jealous. It is only fair to compare myself to my past self. I have the potential to defeat anybody or lose to anybody. All those things I just said are objectively true, but to say I'm better than X player or I'm a top X player, that's subjective, you know? There's nothing to necessarily prove that. Before I'd say, that player sucks, they cost me the game. Now I say, there is no excuse, including losing, to be cruel to other people. Besides, I was in their shoes at one point, and new players are what keep the game alive. Particularly in my case, laser tag. It is so much more important that I get to play the game and that we keep people around than for me to win. And even if sometimes players do cost me games, I would much rather play with those people and accept that that can happen to me than to let it ruin the game for me. Or to belittle them. Before, win at any cost. If they're willing to cheat and be jerks, so will I. After, now, I want to win badly. The only person holding me back from being the best version of myself is me. However, I have decided that the quality of my character is more important than the quality of my gameplay, so I will only try to play honorably and respectfully. Now, that's my choice. It doesn't have to be your choice, but I will say that I feel a lot better about myself knowing that I am a man of morality. That allows me to feel good about myself more than winning, way more than winning ever did. Before, I'll only have fun if I win. Now I say, I cannot always control whether I win or lose, but I can choose to enjoy the game either way. And just be clear, I'm not a perfect player. I still get mad. I still resent certain players. I beat myself up. I would say the difference, though, is night and day compared to about 5 years ago. So, how do we do this inner work? Like I said, it's a lifelong journey, but I want to give you some first steps from Thrive Global. You can start with a clear goal, something attainable, something concrete, like I want to, next time I tilt, I want to calm myself within 1 minute. Or next time I tilt, I want to go for a walk after the game. Something like that. You have to start with square one. You can't make this change overnight. I'm telling you, it could take years. Identify your mental blocks. If you can become self-aware, that's half the battle, which is the next one, creating self-awareness. But as you observe yourself, you know, if you get angry and you breathe and you look inward and you think what your negative thoughts are and you challenge them, you're going to start to see patterns pop up. Like, I always think that I'm stupid when I lose, or when that certain player beats me, I always feel bad, you know? And when you're aware of that, you can start to challenge those things more regularly. Reframing your thoughts, challenging the negative thoughts, we've talked about that. And work at it consistently. Like I said, it can take years. So I would recommend these steps, whichever ones you want to choose. Watch videos from professionals. YouTube has a ton of resources. You can just Google anything, how to stop being angry, how to feel good about myself, how to overcome anxiety. You'll get really good tips. Read self-help books. This is kind of a big one. Like, it takes a lot of effort to dedicate yourself to this, but, you know, these can be in many ways just as effective, if not more, than therapy, and have been for me. Attending therapy, it can be expensive, but it can be life-changing. The results of therapy can last you the rest of your life, and they can untangle really harmful things that you're doing to yourself or believing about yourself in your life. Journaling is a great way to record progress, write out your thoughts, and it's proven to help you retain information. Exercise releases tons of healthy endorphins and, releases trapped emotions. And meditation can help you center yourself and become more self-aware. It is something that I never thought was going to be, like, it sounds really hokey when you think about it, especially in Western society, but I never realized how much my brain never shuts off. And when I meditate and I just listen and I feel my body, I become so much more at peace. I want to tie up some loose ends here at the end. Post-traumatic stress disorder triggers. This quote from Red Oak Recovery. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a condition that happens after a terrifying traumatic event. Later, common PTSD triggers can cause the individual to experience nightmares, flashbacks, and anxiety. Learning what triggers PTSD is necessary so the individual can figure out how to avoid those triggers. This video is not a place to decide on a diagnosis for yourself. You want to get a professional therapist if you feel like you might be experiencing PTSD. But, these questions might help you make an identification on that. Is this game bringing up a traumatic experience for me? And is this a healthy game to spend my time on? If so, I think it's really important to give yourself some grace. If you've been through a traumatic event, sometimes certain players can't handle certain games. You can do work to, make yourself better able for it, but, like I talked about with joy, some games aren't going to bring certain people joy. And I think it's okay to admit that to yourself. So just something to consider if you feel like this might apply to you, that you shouldn't feel bad for choosing a different game altogether. Doesn't make you, a quitter or a loser or anything. To take care of yourself. And one other giant issue with all of this, sometimes you're fine, but another player is tilting. They are angry in an unhelpful and inappropriate way. So I want to give a little tip, shout out for what to do when another person is in the situation. First of all, breathe. Same thing. When someone is shouting at you, breathe, because it is very likely that your body is starting to respond by going into fight, flight, freeze mode. You're starting to get escalated and angry because they're angry at you. Consider the context. Is it appropriate? Is it helpful? For example, are they trying to communicate to you an important message to help win the game? For example, like, maybe you need to go defend another area because the enemy is attacking that area right now. That might be a really appropriate context for someone to shout at you because it's like urgent and important right now. And if it's helpful, it might not feel good to get shouted at, but sometimes the ends justify the means, truly. Like I said, some players, I can and do yell at them in the right context. And a lot of times I go apologize. And they're like, no, I needed to do that thing. Like, consider the context. Next, recognize what you control. You cannot control the person that is angry. So take appropriate steps to get what you want in the situation. Do you want to win the game? Maybe have some grace and ignore the fact that they're angry, and more importantly, consider, what do I need to do? I mean, some people, to be honest, like, they don't mind it when a person shouts at them. For some people, that's a non-issue. But I think it's also important to recognize that it's not that for everybody. Some people will shut down or shut you out if you yell at them, and it's not the most effective way to communicate with them. if that's you, you know, you might need to take steps to get what you need. For example, after the game, you might basically tell them, I don't respond well to that. And, but that's after the game. I do want to go over some de-escalation techniques. I think these are good for everybody to know if you're playing a game. I think a world where people understand the de-escalation techniques in all games is going to create better communities where anger is less rampant and destructive, and it will help people manage their emotions better. So I'm going to allow Dr. Christian Conte, I think is his name, to give us some tips here. 3 steps for how to de-escalate somebody.
The first step, and now I really want you to follow me on this, is to validate that person. What do I mean? Here's what I mean. By validating someone, you are simply acknowledging how that person feels. In other words, if the person is fired up, angry, you're acknowledging that. Hey, you seem really fired up right now.
That's step 1. Let's see. Step number 2.
Step 2 in de-escalating someone is to help people find options. In other words, there's always a choice. In everything we do, we always have a choice. And someone who's out of control still has a choice to act however he or she wants to act. But what we want to do is help that person explore what those options are. In other words, once we've validated that person and once that person feels like, all right, okay, I feel heard, I feel understood. Now we can explore options. There are options. Look, you can do that thing, which is that out of control thing that you were impulsively thinking about doing, and that is an option, but let's explore the consequences of that option. Now, once we explore that consequence of that option, which again, that's viable choice because that's what that person was obviously feeling and thinking. Once we explore that, now we can move on to other options. Now you could do that, or we could step back, we could walk away, we could think about something else, and that's when we can start to pull in our ideas.
Now that was a lot of words, and I want to just, acknowledge that sometimes in the middle of a high stress, time limited game, you're not going to have time to have a whole conversation about some of these things. But I think it still applies, and I'll talk about that in just a second after we get through the 3rd step.
It's allow for choice. In other words, people always have a choice in anything that they're going to do, so you recognizing their freedom of choice, and you genuinely and heartfelt give them a chance to say, hey, listen, whatever you choose is on you, okay? I'm here with you, but whatever choice you make, that is your choice, and I respect your free will. So we're validating the person, we're helping them find other choices, and then ultimately, we're letting go.
And that letting go is real important. Also, that's a great thumbnail. Great sound effects too on the video. Yeah, so look, your de-escalation of a person could have different motives. You might be trying to win the game. And so, if you're going to validate them, you could say, yeah, that sucks. Yeah, that sucks could be your validation. Like just acknowledging that, you're not against them because a person who's angry has their defenses up, like they're in fighting mode. An example of a choice you could offer. Let's say that, you're okay with them being escalated. You want to try to win the game. You could say like, are you going to freak out or are you going to go attack this area? Or like, you could even try to psychologically convince them there are 2 options and get them to go down one of these paths. For example, you could say like, hey, either hold this area if you need to, or help me go over here and accomplish this task. Like you can get their mind off of the situation now that you validated them and try to push them into a more productive direction. But the letting go part, that is really important. Because when a person's out of control, I think sometimes the impulse for most people would be, you could run away from it. Or if you're going to stay, you're like, I need to get them to calm down. I'm sorry, but you can't get a person to calm down. They have to choose to calm down. And it's going to depend on the person and the situation as far as how likely they are to do it. So I will say, like, if you're a person who doesn't want the confrontation and your desire is to remove yourself from a person who is shouting at you or who is escalated in your presence, you could say, I need you to calm down or I'm going to leave. And you know what? That might make him angry, but this is a control thing. You have control over you. You don't have control over them. So you could set that boundary. You could say, I need you to get a grip or I'm going to leave. And if they choose not to, if it is worth it to you to quit, you have that power. You always have that option. I think it's important to empower people like that. We're at the end of the presentation here. The message I want to really get across is that games should serve us, not in reverse. I think the whole point of a game's existence, why we play them, like I said, it should bring us joy on some level. Whether that's the joy of a hard-earned victory or the joy of playing a game that just brings light to your life. And, you know, anger has a very destructive power when it's not used properly. I hope that everyone who watches this and who delves deeper into themselves is able to recognize the importance, not just for themselves, but for others, of getting themselves under control. As we just learned, no one can control you. Only you can. And so when you tilt and you create difficulties for other people in games, when you make games uncomfortable, when you sabotage your own team's success, no one's going to be able to stop that the way you can. People might be masters at de-escalation, and maybe they can help you, but at the end of the day, it's you, and you need to do the work. And that's hard. Like, it is not easy to look at the work ahead of you to be like, oh man, I messed up here. Oh man, I have so much anger about this one thing. I have empathy. Like, it sucks. It really does suck. But you can either continue to live with that anger, or you can do work to begin to make progress on it. And that's your choice. I'm letting go. I'm leaving some additional resources in the description of this video. A lot of them are the videos from this video, the videos in the video in full. You can go watch them yourself. And some additional ones that I think are helpful. And I don't have an audience for this video, so I left questions in there. But if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to give my opinion. Just as a reminder, I am still a student. I'm not a professional licensed counselor. But I am studying, and I think I have some authority to speak on this, as I have myself dealt with a lot of people who are